Shana Tova. The words of Rachel Noam in The View from Above. I turned into Bochrogov Street. Ahead of me, I had to pass the skeleton of a new building under construction. The sidewalk was torn up. Piles of sand covered the area, and there were pieces of wood and other debris scattered about. A short way up the street, a tall woman with curly blonde hair approached. Then it happened. Suddenly, I felt a violent blow strike my head. I fell flat on the ground in front of the woman. A heavy 18-foot wooden beam plunging from the scaffolding atop the 5-story structure hit me and sailed into the street as if thrown by a catapult. All at once, I felt I was outside my body, floating upward about 12 to 15 feet above the sidewalk, watching the scene below. I did not know how I had left my body or how I had gotten up there. Everything happened so suddenly that I was caught completely by surprise. I saw the tall woman bending over my body, trying to detect a sign of life in my motionless form. Then she started screaming for help. This is my body, I thought, but I am not inside it. I am looking at it from above. How is this possible? With what eyes am I seeing this? And where are my ears? How could I be hearing all this noise in the street? I was baffled. Obviously, I existed. I was real. I was conscious. But I was not inside my frame. I always thought that I and my body were identical. I did not know I was a being that was more than just a physical body. A change began to occur in my status of observer. The events in the street began to fade away into darkness, and through this darkness, I perceived a glimmer of brightness. As the radiance came closer, it grew in intensity, becoming a glorious, powerful light, radiating an abundant flow of exalted spirituality. In harmony with this flow of illumination, the events in my life began to pass before my eyes. The images were three-dimensional, and I saw myself taking part in them. My entire life flashed by from the day I was born until the very moment I fell to the ground. The stream of light was accompanied by a flow of sublime love, the kind of love I had never before experienced. I felt incapable of remaining an independent entity. I simply melted away. No words can describe the enchantment, the wonder, the incomparable, infinite goodness. I sensed in it compassion, pleasure, strength, happiness, and beauty, all in an infinite profusion. I saw the face of loved ones who had died long ago. I felt their presence. I could feel their eyes and their hands reaching toward me. I felt a sense of a higher power, a being of infinite might. The pull of this powerful love was almost irresistible. I felt my willpower crumbling and melting away. With this outpouring of goodness and love, I was losing my will to be a separate individual. It felt as though a loving mother embraced me and pulled my eye toward a state of perfect happiness. I was filled with compassion for my loved ones who would remain in this world, for my body, for the life and the time that I had wasted. And a wave of pity swept through me. But this compassion brought me back into my body. I heard a voice saying, "Do you want to go back?" And I heard my voice saying yes. I burst into tears as the woman who was bending over me grabbed my hand and coaxed me to return to my feet. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the Swiss-born psychiatrist, famous for her iconic work with the dying, collected more than 20,000 anecdotes similar to this one. Her book on death and dying was published in 1969, and it wasn't until 1975 when Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. of the University of Virginia, writing in his book, Life After Life, coined the term that we all know now, near-death experience. According to Dr. Moody, about 1 person in 30 has had a near-death experience. One can be any age, at any time in one's life, healthy or experiencing illness, in any place and at any hour of the day or night. The extensive research that has taken place about near-death experiences in the last many years has noted startling similarities across cultures and across a range of ages, including consistently tales of being greeted into a light by deceased loved ones. Also, absolutely common to near-death experiences are inexplicable capacities of awareness of the surroundings, immediate and farther away. Very, very common as well were that people who had suffered tragedies at the same time often saw someone who had actually died coming to greet them, even though the person who ultimately lived could not have known that the other person had passed away nearby. Death is a part of life, yet it brings feelings of loss, of course. When we reflect on the passing of loved ones, on our own mortality, we can't help but ask, what happens to us immediately upon our death? Rabbi Michelle Brand Medwin speaks of Jewish tradition's examination of the soul, which is eternal, and that after the body dies, it enters what our ancient sages called Olam Haba, the world to come. Ancient rabbis and medieval mystics described it as a non-earthly existence where one could experience out-of-body sensations, being greeted by loved ones, being bathed in divine light, attaining wisdom, undergoing a final life accounting, and being enveloped with a sense of peace and tranquility. In many ways, this realm spoken about in the Middle Ages is very similar to these near-death experiences reported by modern patients. People who report such an experience often speak of an out-of-body experience, watching from above what is happening below, such as doctors working on bodies or loved ones conversing by their side. Jewish texts also describe the soul as separating from the body after death and hovering or resting below. For instance, in the book of Daniel, we hear, "But you go on to the end, you shall rest and arise to your destiny at the end of days." In the Midrash on Leviticus, we hear, "For 3 days after death, the soul hovers over the body, intending to re-enter it." And in Dr. Moody's Life After Life, we hear, "I had a floating sensation. I looked back and could see myself on the bed below, and there was no fear. I was not in the least bit upset or frightened. It was just a feeling of tranquility." The experience of being greeted by loved ones is so common. People report experiencing deceased relatives and friends welcoming and guiding them. One comatose person reported seeing a friend whom he thought was still alive, only to find out after he recovered that this friend had died while he was in a coma. Jewish texts in the Zohar, the greatest work of Jewish mysticism, describe, "At the hour of a man's departure from this world, his father and relatives gather round him, and he sees them and recognizes them. And likewise, all with whom he associated in this world, they accompany his soul to the place where it is to abide," written almost 1,000 years ago. And in Life After Life, we hear, "There were people I had known from my past life who had passed on before, my grandmother and a girl I had known when I was in school, and many other relatives and friends. I felt they had come to protect or guide me, almost as if I were coming home, and they were there to greet or welcome me." The experience of divine light is reported in almost all people who have experienced an NDE, a near-death experience. In the Talmud and Tractate Brachot, they describe the world to come as a place where there is no eating or drinking, no jealousy, animosity, or rivalry. The righteous sit with crowns on their heads and enjoy the radiance of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Another voice in Life After Life says, "I knew I was dying. There was nothing I could do about it because no one could hear me. And all this made me feel very bad at first. But then this bright light came and it gave off heat. I felt a warm sensation. The light spoke to me. I felt so good, secure, and loved." Many who report near-death experiences talk about gaining instant wisdom. The Talmud tells us that when a baby is born, an angel pushes on his upper lip, creating a dent that we all have, so that he forgets all he saw and knew previously as a soul, and that knowledge returns when the soul separates from the human body. It's described in the Talmud, but Kenneth Ring in Lessons from the Light says, "When I left my body, I felt all-knowing for a few minutes. Suddenly, everything seemed to make perfect sense." Many people who've experienced a near-death experience talk of undergoing a life review. Aided by their initial greeter or other spiritual beings, they come to see where they did wrong and what they could have done better. The final accounting became an opportunity for them to learn from their errors and become a better person. In Life After Life, another anecdote related, when the light appeared, the light said, "What do you have to show me that you've done with your life?" And all of a sudden, I was back early in my childhood. From then on, it was like I was waking up from the time of my very life then, right up to the presence. In the Zohar, we hear, "Angelic messengers will come and help the person complete the process of life review by counting up the days that a man has lived, the sins that he has committed, and all the works that he has accomplished." And most people, but not all, most people who have said they have experienced a near-death experience say that they felt a sense of peace. This is related to the wisdom of Solomon in chapter 3, verse 2, when it was written, "The souls of the virtuous are in the hands of God. No torment can ever touch them again. In the eyes of the unwise, they did appear to die, but they are at peace." Dr. Melvin Morse, a pediatrician in Seattle, interviewed many young children who had been in serious states of illness. He spoke to 121 children who were critically ill and on medication, but not near death. This led Morse to believe that near-death experiences were not drug-induced or the psychological product of fear. But he spoke to numerous children who had undergone a near-death experience. 10 years later, he conducted interviews again. Almost all of them, 8 of them said that their lives had been fuller, richer, and that they were more mature and felt they were happier than most of their peers. Each stated a lack of fear of death because of the blissful feelings associated with the near-death experience. 80% of those initial 10 articulated a purpose for his or her return from death, which for one child was as simple as being kinder to his parents. For another, it was what led him to become a research scientist. The near-death experiences, Dr. Morse concluded, had contributed to these children growing into people who saw life as purposeful and precious. Of course, there are skeptics. Many have proposed biological explanations for near-death experiences, that perhaps they are the product of oxygen deprivation, anoxia, which triggers endorphins, morphine-like painkillers naturally occurring in the brain that produce euphoria and the appearance of light, and in combination with our vivid imagination, foster the vision of deceased loved ones. Others, including the late Dr. Carl Sagan, asserted that the experience of light in trauma is derived from a deeply embedded memory of passing through the birth canal. I imagine that some of you have probably experienced something like a near-death experience. The likelihood, given our numbers in the room, are that at least a couple of people have. Rabbi Shmuel Yanklowitz writes that Midah v'Yom HaKippurim mechaprin, the rabbinic teaching that the 2 ways to truly atone are death and Yom Kippur. But the 2 are really very similar. On Yom Kippur, we eschew food and drink, similar to one close to death. We say our confessions, just like someone preparing to die. Many customarily wear white on Yom Kippur, like the same plain shroud that one is buried in. We remove ourselves from leather shoes, bathing, anointing, and intimate relations as though we are in mourning for one another or for ourselves. Our lives are lived in our bodies. On Yom Kippur, we are invited to step out of them as if we were gone. Some of us visited the cemetery this morning to honor those who have passed away, and in this way we soften our hearts to our mortality. We ask ourselves, and we ask the Eternal, who shall live and who shall die? Yom Kippur is a day to reflect on our mortality. When we embrace Yom Kippur, we have a near-death experience. We are invited to be transformed by it. Preparing for death, we are to more deeply celebrate life. Protesting death should not overtake us, but taking ownership of life must. The great French existentialist Simone de Beauvoir wrote, "We have a hard time living because we are so bent on outwitting death." On Yom Kippur, we let our guard go and embrace the inevitable. We are reminded that although our death will come someday, today we live. We best perform the mitzvah of Bacharta B'Chaim, choosing life, once we are aware of the alternative and that there is a choice to be made. Longtime hospice worker Kathleen Dowling Singh laid out stages of dying in her book, The Grace in Dying. They are, according to her, chaos, surrender, and transcendence. Yom Kippur follows those same stages. Many of us feel chaos during the night, and in the early morning of Yom Kippur, we are hit like a ton of bricks. This is happening, and it's a long 25 hours. We begin to surrender once we realize that we are able to transcend our hunger and thirst and personal desires. And finally, we might reach a sense of transcendence in the late afternoon when we tap into our deeper potential to understand ourselves and the world. The Talmud in Moed Katan teaches the following story. Rav Nachman appeared to Rava in a dream. Rav Nachman had died, and Rava asked, "Master, did you suffer any pain?" Rava asked. Rav Nachman replied, "Dying was as easy as taking a hair from a glass of milk." I don't know if it was a near-death experience, but about a year after my father's passing, and probably influenced by this Talmud story, I had a very vivid dream. I saw through a hospital gathering area where doctors were helping themselves to snacks and coffee. And on the other side, I saw a bridge outside, leading to a destination I could not see. On the bridge stood my beloved father, looking exactly as he had on the day I met him in October of 1969. He looked well, and he was upright, not as he had looked in his final days, of course. And I said to him in the dream, "Daddy, did it hurt?" And he said, "Not at all. It was as easy as falling asleep." That dream has brought me so much comfort these last few years. On Yom Kippur, we learn that we need not fear death. Instead, we must embrace life. This is the kind of near-death experience that is intended to be a rebirth. We are in a state of compassion tonight. We begin with words of comfort, and we end with words of hope. Yom Kippur does not have to be a death. As my beloved friend Rabbi Cantor Eva Robbins wrote just today, there is no more compassionate space than that which holds each one of us for 9 months, nourishing and protecting us into life. Yom Kippur is a moment of re-entering the divine womb, where we can be rebirthed, coming through with expansion and elevation, cleansed, strengthened, and reinvigorated. Love, grace, and compassion are the heart of Yom Kippur, and learning to emulate these divine qualities for ourselves and for others is one of the greatest gifts we receive each Day of Atonement. Let this day, when the veil between this world and the next is as thin as it ever is, be one that invites us back to life and to strength and to good. Gamar Tov.